Hey,
Okay,
Josh.
we're taping. How's it going, Ryan?
Good. How are you?
Good, good. So they must be scraping the bottom of the barrel here, because I don't think either one of us are bloggers.
I know. This is a new low for Blogging Heads TV having us on. But
Yeah. Well, what could Mickey be doing that he doesn't have time to tape?
No, you won't hear me taking any shots at Mickey.
I just lobbed you a softball. Well, we're here to talk first of all about your cover piece on Barack Obama and the gloriously new and redesigned New Republic. So let me ask you that. I mean, the piece has been talked a little bit already on Blogging Heads, so I'm assuming most people have read it. So I wanted to get you to defend your thesis a little bit. You had a somewhat contrarian take on Obama. I think the knock on him among us kind of, insider, mainstream media, Washington pundit types is usually that he's, an attractive guy, but lightweight and inexperienced, and, kind of a doe in the forest, and that when, push comes to shove in the heat of the presidential campaign, he won't have the steel or the spine or the toughness to fight off Hillary's machine, et cetera, et cetera. You came away from Chicago not really thinking that, right?
Yeah. Look. There are obviously still some outstanding questions about that, right? Presidential campaign is like nothing he's ever experienced. But what I did is I went back and looked at what he says is his most formative education, the best education he ever had in his life.
And this was working as an organizer for Saul Alinsky. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, look, this guy went to Harvard. He went to Occidental, Columbia, and Harvard, and he says that his best education was in his 20s when he was hanging out on the south side of Chicago, working with these Chicago organizers. And as a lot of people know, Chicago is the sort of birthplace of community organizing. There's this long history there with the founder of community organizing, Saul Alinsky. If you want to be a community organizer, Chicago is the place to go.
Yeah, but that also sounds like the kind of thing you say when you want to sound high-minded.
Yeah,
blah blah blah. So what's the bottom line? What did he do that was so great?
I thought that too. That this is just a campaign gimmick, but it is. And whether my thesis is correct or not, his self-identification as a community organizer is real. This wasn't something he just did for 4 years. I mean, after he came back to Chicago after law school, he was involved with community organizing foundations, and he taught classes on community organizing. He was just enmeshed in the Chicago community organizing world for years and years, even after he went to the state senate.
Sure.
Anyway,
but how does that?
Let me get to your question.
His presidential campaign,
right? So we all have this question about Obama. Is he tough enough? Basically the question is he political enough? Right?
Yeah.
Because the thesis of his campaign is that politics is broken and that the country is polarized, and we need someone to sort of rise above that polarization and bring people together, which sounds great, but the other candidates who have run on that sort of message have always just gotten crushed. And the example I use, and I think others have used before me, is Bill Bradley.
Yeah.
Remember, Bradley left the Senate in 1996 complaining about politics being broken. And he tried to run this campaign against Gore where he wouldn't engage in the day-to-day combat, and he just sort of, he was too good for it.
His heart was never in it, and he was this sort of big...
Like Adlai Stevenson-like figure. And Gore, had the machine, the Hillary-like machine is the comparison that just destroyed the guy. So I certainly don't think the question's been answered definitively, but one thing I came away with from Chicago and from looking at his early campaigns is that the guy, he didn't get to where he is today by being, a nice, quiet young man who speaks with a lot of high-minded rhetoric. The guy has some killer political instincts that are underappreciated, and I think it starts with his the lessons he learned from Alinsky, which were very hard-headed, practical stuff. Like Alinsky's heroes were the real tough guy labor organizers from the 1930s, like John L. Lewis. And Alinsky's whole theory was, you gotta, we need to adopt the methods and theories that labor uses to get concessions from the business community. We as citizens need to go after politicians in the same way.
So basically be realistic and hard-headed, and don't
Exactly.
be one of these pie-in-the-sky, moony, undergraduate liberal whatevers who And so you buy that Obama really learned from that and adopted that.
I actually do. I do. He certainly didn't blindly adopt it. He's got a lot of criticism of Alinsky. Alinsky's changed over the years. Even the Alinskyites aren't blind followers of Alinsky anymore. But I do think he came away with some core lessons. And one is, there's a famous Alinsky saying, "You've got to live in the world as it is, not as we would like it to be." Mm-hmm. So even if you're a candidate that talks about a politics, if you talk about a politics that you like to see practiced, that doesn't mean that the American political system appreciates that, and that means that you have to practice a campaign in the world as it is. And look, the first campaign where he actually lived up to this reputation is when he ran for the state senate in 1996.
And he sidelined the long-time insider, what's her name?
Alice Palmer.
And I thought that was really the sort of compelling example in your piece, but let me push back on that a little bit.
Wait, let's for people who haven't read the piece, let's just quickly recap what that was.
Sure.
Alice Palmer was a long-time Southside Chicago politician. Goes back in the community into this 60s activist. She'd been there a long time. Obama's this young guy. Palmer,
outsider, Harvard guy. Not part of the machine, not part of the community.
That's right. Certainly not part of the machine. And sort of only recently part of the community. And Palmer wanted to run for Congress. And the stories are a little fuzzy as to whether Palmer literally promised Obama, "Hey, I'm running for Congress, you can have this seat." Mm-hmm. That's still in dispute, whether she made that ironclad promise or not. But what did happen, what we know happened, is that Palmer lost her congressional primary. And then she decided, well, I kind of want that state Senate seat back after all. And
Obama wasn't having it.
And Obama said, "No way! I'm running for state senate. You left to run for Congress. You lost. There are no do-overs." And some of the leading Democratic officials in Chicago went to Obama. A lot of the black leadership went to him and said, "Hey, you got to step aside. Alice Palmer, you got to wait your turn." And Obama said no. And what he actually did is he challenged her petitions to even get on the ballot. And he won the challenge, and he cleared not just Palmer, but every other candidate from the ballot because he found some fake signatures. And he won the race because she didn't have an opponent. Anyway, so that's an early episode that shows, look, the guy's from Chicago, he knows how to play hardball.
And that's really the key evidence that he isn't just some pushover who's, gotten the fast ticket to where he is because he's, well-spoken or attractive or anything like that. But let me push back a little bit here. I was out in Chicago. One of the less glorious moments of my political reporting career was 2 years ago. I was heading out to Chicago to write about the Illinois Senate race, and everybody at the time was buzzing about two people. There was this guy, Obama, this very attractive, articulate, well-spoken, blah, blah, blah candidate was how everybody talked about him. The other one was a guy named Blair Hull who'd made his money as part of a card-counting ring and gambling and turned it into like millions and millions of dollars as an investor. And given my sterling instincts, I picked Hull and went out and followed him around. And
then you were generous.
My defense actually turned out to be a hilarious piece. The guy wrote an algebraic formula for how he was going to buy a United States Senate seat. But in the event, his campaign collapsed in an explosion of it was basically unsealed divorce records that showed him to be allegedly a violent, coke-snorting math nerd, and his campaign just sort of went up in flames. And curiously enough, so did that of the Republican opponent, Jack Ryan, whose unsealed divorce records and swingers and sex clubs and all that just sort of creeped out everybody. But Obama really sort of traipsed the nomination, or to the Democratic nomination after that. I mean, Blair collapsed. There were 5 other guys in the race. He wound up winning easily. I mean, it wasn't really much of a challenge. And you go back a step. He challenged Bobby Rush and got slaughtered in this congressional race. And as I said, he traipsed the Senate going up against Alan Keyes. I mean, come on.
Right.
Where's the where's the race you can point to that shows that this guy has won a tough race, even on like a state level? Right. Never mind, at the presidential level. I mean, what it sounds like he did in Chicago was some pretty clever maneuvering to knock these people off the ballot, and more power to him, for having done that. But I still don't see how he sort of prevailed in a tough race, or what makes people think that he doesn't still maybe have a glass jaw, especially when you go up against the fearsome Hillary juggernaut.
Yeah, the joke is we're looking at Obama's record and starting with Alice Palmer, where she wasn't his opponent because he knocked her off the ballot. Is that his opponents have a way of just sort of vaporizing. and that maybe Hillary should watch out because something just sort of happens to Obama's opponents. And look, the argument of the piece is not that he's Hillary Clinton or this ruthless politician. It's just to explore, to point out the fact that he's not this pie-in-the-sky idealist and that he has a sort of political streak that's underappreciated, and you don't really come out of Chicago politics. You don't really get to the Senate, even if your opponents do sort of fizzle out, and you don't get to the level he's out at without, developing some of these political skills. So I don't want to oversell the thesis. Someone once taught me that the first rule of journalism is to simplify and then exaggerate. So let me just take a half step back from maybe the way the piece has been interpreted. He's certainly.
You sure this isn't just the fearsome power of my argument?
No, it's not. No, I just think you might be overstating the argument a little bit.
Fair enough.
But look, and the other evidence in the piece is. Let me say one thing about the Bobby Rush race, where that really was. That was, often you learn more from your losses than your victories in politics. And he did get crushed by Bobby Rush, and it was.
And why? Why was that? I mean, I know that he did. I don't really know what the reasons were.
Well, what happened was the reason he challenged Rush was, and look, one thing about Obama is, if you look at his history, it actually would have been pretty easy to predict that he was going to run for president, because this is a guy that every time an opportunity has presented itself, he seized it. When Palmer was going to run for Congress, he seized that state Senate seat. Bobby Rush, the year before of the 2000 race, Bobby Rush got beaten really bad by Daley in the mayoral election in Chicago.
Oh, I see. Okay, it seemed wounded.
Especially among blacks. Yeah. He had as a former Black Panther, he had a really good relationship with the black community, and Daley did really well with African Americans in the city. So people thought, okay, Rush is vulnerable, and that convinced Obama to get in that race.
Yeah,
turned out to be a big mistake. Now, what people forget about that race is. Look, Obama did get attacked, and there were some painful attacks on Obama for not being black enough.
Carpetbagger, and
exactly. And the thesis, the sort of core argument of a lot of the recent spate of pieces about Obama, not being black enough, whatever that means. People always point to the Bobby Rush race. Oh, he wasn't black enough. He got beat by Bobby Rush. It's just a total misreading of that race.
How so? I mean, I remember there was some tragedy where Rush's was his daughter, his sister, somebody got murdered.
His son got shot and killed in an attempted robbery. And after that, Rush, nobody had a chance against Rush. There was another guy in the race named Donnie Trotter. And once Rush's son in the fall, it was the primary was in the spring, and his kid got killed in the fall. And once that happened, there wasn't a race. So it's
sort of like Carnahan in Missouri a couple of years ago, where it's such a tragedy that there's really no question that you're going to carry that vote.
Yeah, and the other part of it was, this gets into complicated Chicago politics. Obama's base was on the south side of Chicago. It's slightly more middle class black community. Rush's base was more in the center of the city. They were Obama wasn't known as well citywide, is basically what I'm saying. But anyway, the key thing that people miss is it was about that murder. It wasn't about
that he wasn't black enough or couldn't pull off the race. Okay. Yeah. Well, absent a murder in the Democratic presidential primary, what does all this tell us about how he stacks up against Hillary? I mean, here's somebody who I think until fairly recently most Democrats thought maybe was invulnerable, and yet he very quickly and very suddenly jumped in the race. It appears to be mounting a credible challenge.
Yeah, look, she's still. If you had to bet, your bet should still be on Hillary Clinton being the nominee, right? I mean, this is historically the one with the most money and the biggest organization has won, and that happened with Gore. It happened with Kerry, and Hillary's in that front runner spot now. But I would venture to guess that just looking at the trend lines of the Hillary-Obama matchup, that they're basically going to be tied. By the end of the summer. I mean, that's what happened with Bradley and Gore.
But how is that possible? I mean, I spent a lot of time with Hillary over the last year, and all the talk from her campaign when I was reporting on her was that, she was it was a lot of their strategy sort of relied on the fact that there was just this unstoppable momentum.
Right.
I mean, the fact that somebody like Obama could essentially come out of nowhere, and we're talking now about him being tied with her, in a few months. Really kind of blows that campaign strategy to smithereens.
But they
and as
have
you
to
know,
that.
I wasn't all that impressed with Hillary in the piece that I did. I mean, I sort of
No,
felt
it's
like
a veritable hatchet job.
Well, I don't know about that. I think she did a lot of impressive things in the Senate as far as revitalizing her political career.
Yeah.
But I didn't really see that she had these great qualifications or many qualifications at all to be president. So
wait, well, actually, let's
now wait a minute.
Yeah.
Now, am I right in having been hard on her in this piece and suggested that the line I think her people really objected to was that Senator Clinton has a lot to talk about, but she doesn't really have anything to say? I mean, is the fact that she really has proven to be this inexperienced that's allowed someone like Obama with even less experience to sort of catch up and challenge her as quickly as she had?
The shocking thing is, if your thesis was that she didn't have a lot of experience, the best, in some sense, having Obama and Edwards as her principal competitors is the best thing that could have happened to her, right? I mean, these guys make her look like, Chris Dodd or someone that's been around for 30 years.
Bob Byrd.
Yeah, exactly. Make her look like Robert Byrd. It's like it's in some ways I think it's the ideal comparison for Hillary. But look, what happened with Gore Bradley and what happened with Kerry Dean is that the front runner always stumbles, the front runner always gets challenged, the polls always tighten. I think at the end of the year, in 2003, Kerry was in like the single digits in the national polls. So that's probably inevitable, and I bet Hillary's campaign, would acknowledge that. But let's flip things around here. Let's talk about Hillary a little bit more.
Okay.
Why don't you, since people may not have read it in a while, why don't you take us through the thesis of that piece?
Well, my piece basically this was the cover story of the November Atlantic. So it's still sort of recent, but a lot has happened since then. What I did in the piece was to go back basically and take a deep look at what I thought was the one part of her career, her 6 years in the Senate and what she'd done there. There really hasn't been covered much. I mean, for all the coverage of Hillary, it tends to be Clinton administration stuff or Horserace 08 stuff. And I felt like nobody had ever really gone and taken a close look at exactly what she did in the Senate. Because, even in November, the fact that she'd sort of rehabilitated herself and was a presidential frontrunner, to me seemed pretty shocking. Because 6 years ago, if you'd asked me if she'd beat Giuliani in New York, I think I probably would have said no. And if she had, would she have succeeded to the degree that she has in the Senate? And again, I would have said no. And that was no knock on Clinton personally. I just thought with all the baggage and with the fact that, the one real time she's been tested in life, the 1993, Hillary Care initiative had just been a calamity. I just didn't see what evidence there was there that she could really succeed as a politician on her own right, separate from her husband. So I went in and looked at what she did in the Senate and came away impressed on a lot of levels.
What was the most impressive thing that she's done in the Senate? What is the thing that she, in a debate, when someone asks, what have you done for the last 6 or 8 years? I guess it'll be by then. What can she point to? As far as I can tell, it's not a whole lot.
Sort of a key scene in the piece. Let me answer that a little later and sort of say what I came away impressed with. I mean, to me, the way and the speed with which she sort of burrowed herself into the heart of the Senate and won over. Not just sort of Democratic old-timers like Byrd, but Republicans. I mean, she teamed up with sort of everybody across the aisle on, often insignificant legislation, but sort of symbolically it was kind of important. She kind of shifted herself to the center, I think her public image. If you understand the Senate, if you report on it a lot, you understand also, I mean, it's still a very kind of sexist place with like a plantation mentality where women, I really believe this, are to an extent kind of still second-class citizens. She was able to overcome all of that and emerge as a very powerful senator. Now, the knock that I had on her was exactly what you just asked. I mean, if you take a look back at her 6 years, what was her major accomplishment? I argue in the piece that her major accomplishment was rehabilitating the image of Hillary Clinton herself, and that policy-wise she didn't really do anything that significant. If you take a look at what was the one big event in the 6 years in the Senate, it was the war vote. And obviously, whether she'll admit it or not, that was something she got wrong and is now trying to sort of undo or mitigate.
Yeah, let me just put in while you're on that thought, let me put in a plug. There's an amazing piece coming in the next issue of the New Republic, a cover story by Michael Crowley, that's just about that war vote. Anyway,
Okay.
That's my little shameless plug.
Okay. But besides that, I came away sort of thinking, the knock on her was that she's never really done anything brave or risky or selfless, or really done anything that serves any purpose much larger than boosting her own political profile.
All right, well, let me
hold on. And we had this sort of scene in the piece where I sit down and I kind of put this to her and I said, well, what have you done that's brave and risky? And she really can't answer it. And finally, at the end, kind of snaps and says, look, I'm Hillary Clinton. Nobody else has it as tough as I do. And basically made what I thought was a pretty good point. But she still didn't answer the question of having done anything really substantive while in the Senate. And so I thought that the big knock on her really was that aside from being Bill Clinton's wife, I didn't see what legitimate claim she had to the Democratic nomination.
But isn't she right? Isn't it correct that she's Hillary Clinton and nobody else does know what it's like to be Hillary
Has that kind of scrutiny? Sure, absolutely.
Has that kind of scrutiny?
And she's done a marvelous job overcoming that in the Senate. But just because you get picked on a lot doesn't mean that you automatically ought to be the Democratic nominee.
Well, okay, she's also was in the minority for that entire time, right? Mm-hmm. So if you're a freshman senator, or she was a freshman in 2000, mm-hmm. In the minority, is it realistic to think that she could get a whole lot done?
If you're Hillary Clinton, yes, it is, and here's why. The flip side of the I get picked on more than everybody else does is that, she's also got more celebrity and more power to really sort of, go right over the leadership in the Senate, the Republican leadership at the time, and if she wanted to champion something that the Republican leadership didn't want to pass but was still important or the right thing to do, she could have done it. She had the megaphone. But she never did, and you can look at somebody on the other side of the aisle, like a John McCain, for instance, and say, McCain for years championed campaign finance reform when it was deeply unpopular, not only with the public, but within his own party. Right. And yet he did it because it was obviously something he believed in. Nowhere in Hillary Clinton's record do you see an example of her doing something like that, which seems odd to me, and I thought the basis for a valid criticism of her Senate record. Now, as you mentioned, in the event, things for Hillary have really broken well since November. And one of the things I wanted to ask you about, just for fun, I had lunch with a rabid Hillary Clinton fanatic the other day, and we were discussing this.
Lover or hater?
Lover.
Oh, lover. Okay.
Yeah, I guess they come in both flavors. But I'm curious, as a guy who covered Obama and I'm a guy who covered Hillary, who do you think's had the better run since November, Hillary or Obama?
Well, it strikes me that Obama has the same criticism that Hillary has as far as his Senate career goes, which is from the left. It's you see this on a lot of the blogs. It's one of the reasons why he hasn't really been able to become the darling of the lefty blogs yet. Is they look at him and they say, "Hey, you're the most famous politician in America. Go to Washington and use that fame.
Do something.
Do something and be controversial and get out in front." It strikes me as the same criticism that you have of Hillary. Mm-hmm. Look, I could argue this flat around. I mean, look, Obama went from nowhere to the leading challenger to the front runner in the Democratic nomination. He's going to raise as much money as he needs. He's weathered some pretty tough knocks in the last month. Some of the scandal stories, and I can't imagine if you're the Obama campaign, what you could have done better, right? Mm-hmm. Your goal was get in the race and establish yourself as the number one challenger to the front runner, and make sure that you raise as much money as you possibly can. So on March, at the end of this month, whatever it is, it's March 31st, you post a huge score. So I would have to say, just from where he started, Obama. That's not to say, look, Obama, over the last few months, some of the luster, this was inevitable, some of the luster that surrounded Obama has faded a little bit. I mean, he got in a campaign. He went from, being a celebrity to having to actually, be a politician to a certain extent. So it's not quite the same Obama that entered the race. He's come down to earth a little bit. But if I can't imagine what their it seems to me that they have accomplished their goal. Am I wrong?
I was thinking about this, after having lunch with this guy, and surprisingly, not because he convinced me, I came to this on my own, came away thinking that actually it's Hillary who's had the better,
So you went out to lunch with a Hillary supporter, and you came away thinking that Hillary's had great. What is and you weren't spun?
I wasn't spun. No,
okay.
No, but you touched on this earlier. I mean, one of the amazing things, the case I would make if I were writing a piece about Hillary now, or if I actually did have a blog and had something to say about this, was that if you take a look at what's happened to Hillary Clinton since my piece was published in November 2006, I would make the argument that every single thing has broken her way in sort of every area. You've had. My big knock on her was that she had no experience. But the guys, the main challengers who could have claimed that mantle, Evan Bayh, Mark Warner had executive experience. All these guys have sort of fallen by the wayside. And her two greatest challengers, Edwards and Obama, have even less experience than she does, which I think is sort of shocking in its own right. I mean, just the utter lack of experience in the top tier of the Democratic field.
Yeah.
On the other hand, the war in Iraq has gone even further to hell, and the one guy who seemed able to beat her, easily, even 6 months or a year ago, I think if you looked at polls, John McCain, has tethered himself to the Bush administration, has sort of rattled the sabers on Iran, and it's just kind of plummeting in the polls, and so all of a sudden, it just looks like the landscape has, unfolded in a way that is perfect for a Hillary Clinton candidacy.
Yeah.
And I think that short term, Obama did have a terrific quarter or whatever, and I think he's going to probably wind up raising about $25 million, which will give him a huge boost, I think, in the media and begin to add back a little bit of the luster he might have lost. But long term, long term, I think that what's happened in these few months is going to be deeply advantageous to Hillary in the sense that a lot of her biggest weaknesses have basically been taken away by the fact of who it is she's up against. But I reserve the right to sort of take all that back if Al Gore jumps in the race.
Right. Here's why I think you're wrong about that. I think that either having Bayh or Warner or anyone else that Hillary Clinton could point to as the sort of conservative candidate, the candidate that's a couple of clicks to the right from her, would have been a good thing.
Because what? By defeating them, she could claim that mantle of being centrist conservative?
The candidate that wins the Democratic primaries is never the guy that's the furthest to the right, and it's never the guy that's the furthest to the left. It's always the person that's sort of just acceptable enough to all the constituencies. That's why a guy like Lieberman would never had a chance. And this goes back a long way, Gore in '88. And she's now identified as, surprisingly enough, and I think part of it is through that process that you described in your piece in the Senate, which was going repositioning as a centrist, having Mark Penn, pounding away every single day. You've got to be the centrist. You've got to think about suburban swing voters. You've got to think in terms of micro initiatives. Just sticking with that philosophy for all these years. I think it boxed her into this corner in the Democratic primaries where the image she overcame one problem and she's created another one for her. That's the first problem. And then the second, very related problem.
Hold on a second. What exactly is the problem?
She's too far to the right. She's now the candidate. She's now the hawk in the primary. She's got no one like Bayh or Warner that she can push off of. And the candidates are going to, Obama and Edwards are going to come at her from the left. The second related problem is the war. I
agree with you there.
I don't think Obama ever would have gotten in the race, but for the fact that he got the war right, and that is just an incredibly powerful argument to take Hillary down. And she can't escape this question. I mean, she can't. She's rerunning the Kerry campaign.
Yeah.
So I think one
of the big knocks on her in my piece again was the issue of the war vote and what I have since come to believe as, she's flip-flopping, but she's sort of doing it very slowly. I mean, she's sort of doing it so incrementally
you can't
that she's kind of hoping nobody will notice.
It's like a frog in boiling water.
Oh, don't go there. That whole frog in boiling water thing is completely wrong. See, Jim Fallows' piece on the Atlantic website.
All right, excuse me.
But already, I mean, the position she was clinging to in our interviews last fall has been sort of tossed aside, and she's now ticked further toward being anti-war. So
one other point on this, though, is one of the fundamental fundamental ideas that the Hillary campaign went into 2008 with was that, just looking at the Democratic constituencies, they believed that Bill Clinton's popularity, because it's not Hillary, it's Bill Clinton's popularity in the black community, gave them a firewall. It gave them a firewall in South Carolina, the fourth state to vote. And the thing that they always feared, and I remember this from 2006 or 2005, I forget now, when I wrote a big Hillary Clinton piece about her staff. The thing that they always told me was, we're watching Obama. We're watching Obama.
Really?
That's
even
the
back
guy.
then?
Even back then. Because people, as soon as he got to the Senate, people were talking about him running for president. And they were talking about it all the way back then. And why? It's because she believed that she had this sort of iron lock on African-American voters, and that even if she stumbled in New Hampshire, she would win South Carolina because blacks make up half the Democratic electorate. So I think that's a huge issue. And someone explained, I think it was Joe Trippi recently explained something very smart to me. It's like, the reason that, the best thing that happened in 1992 for Bill Clinton, he got a lot of lucky breaks. One was Mario Cuomo not running, but the other one was Jesse Jackson not running. Remember, Jackson ran in 84 and 88. So the black vote was really, really up for grabs in a way that it hadn't been in 84 and 88. And that was the sort of, Cuomo getting out and Jackson getting out really sort of helped Clinton sort of lock things up. And Trippi's point was, this doesn't necessarily mean that Obama is going to take her down, but if you're Edwards or if you're one of the other candidates, it really gives you a shot at Hillary.
It means she's not invulnerable.
Because it peels off enough votes that if you're John Edwards or even someone, if Biden or Dodd ever catch on, at least it gives them a fighting chance. So anyway, I think that those developments in the last 6 months, certainly aren't great for Hillary.
No, that's a good point. Let me ask you this, because I came away from my lunch with the Hillary person the other day thinking that I'm still not convinced on her. I'm still not convinced on Obama or Edwards. And I was procrastinating the other day and clicked over to New Republic and read a wonderful piece by your colleague John Judas, which basically said that nobody in the 2008 race has the experience to be president. I think that's something I ultimately agree with.
On both sides,
on both sides. I mean, I tend to agree more on the Democratic side than on the Republican side. Say what you will about their positions, but I think Romney, McCain, have some decent experience. But what about the issue of experience? I mean, how important is it? I mean, one of the things that constantly surprises me is that the fact that the Democratic field really hasn't been criticized much for lacking any experience. I don't think Hillary has it, Edwards, Obama, and yet this isn't something we really hear talked about. It's the fact that the Bush administration, with all its experience, has screwed up so entirely that it's sort of rendered the issue moot.
Yeah, I happen to be writing a piece on the same subject, but so I think actually it's on both sides. Look, McCain's no longer the front runner on the Republican side. Giuliani is.
Yeah.
We've never had a president whose last government job was being mayor of the city. I mean, that's a totally new type of experience in preparation for the presidency, and I think it's an open question whether voters think it's legit. And Romney's a one-term governor. It used to be in presidential politics that one-term governors were not quite laughed at, but you raised a lot of questions about whether you were ready to be president if you served 4 years in a state. And halfway through those 4 years, Romney changed his position on almost every significant issue. So, he really had two-year terms. So I think it's on both sides. And then, I think in general, though, there's a little bit more respect for executive experience, so you get a little bit more from being mayor of a big city and being governor than you do.
Well, Romney is a successful business executive too, which is something that really hasn't been talked about much.
That's true, actually. That's a story that's a story he needs to tell. I think part of the reason that the Romney people don't want to tell that story is because the Romney, the business executive, was the Romney, the Rockefeller Republican. He was like his dad. He was a moderate Republican, and I think when you start digging into what he was like at Bain, you start to realize. And
that doesn't fit with the rabid social conservative Romney of today. Although like the weather in Florida, wait 15 minutes.
Exactly. Yeah. But you're right. Look at on the Democratic side. I added this up last night. Richardson, Biden, and Dodd combined have 89 years of government experience. And they're sitting there at the bottom of the pack, while guys like Edwards, 6 years in the Senate, and Obama, 2 years in the Senate, and I think it's 9 years in the state Senate, which was previously not considered, just experience at all. They're the principal challengers to Hillary, not the guys with all the years. So, I think I got to argue that experience it's been like this for a few cycles, right? Being in the Senate always gives you a problem because you have to vote on a whole bunch of stuff, and that can be used against you. But I think we may be passing the point at which experience is now actually a liability in presidential politics.
Well, and I wonder too. I was thinking back the other day my company does National Journal does their insiders poll, which are always an interesting gauge of sort of the insider wisdom and where things are going. And a year ago, the guy who far and away was leading the pack in the Republican side was George Allen. And here's somebody who had experience as governor, had experience as a senator. Seemed to have the entire package, and then just sort of collapsed spectacularly with a little assist from you in the New Republic. But here's a guy, with all his experience, just sort of went up in smoke. Is personality? Is media savviness? What is it? I mean, is something
power,
else
right?
sort of eclipsed? What's that?
I think it's star power, and part of it,
Judas
got at this in his piece. I mean, part of it is that we've moved from, and this is a long time trend, but we've really moved beyond party politics and into candidate-centered politics. And there's an open question about what the parties are good for now. I mean, it used to be the conventions mattered because you would actually figure out who your nominee was going to be. When they opened up the process and turned everything over to the primaries in the early 70s, the convention process didn't matter anymore. It was all about winning primaries, and star power started to matter a whole lot more, and connecting with voters started to matter a whole lot more. The other thing that parties give you is a sort of policy apparatus, a fundraising apparatus, an organizational apparatus. I mean, a candidate can develop all those things on his own now. So I think that's the sort of trend.
But not only that, right? But the party has suddenly begun to lose all these things, right? McCain-Feingold steered money away from the party, so suddenly parties aren't a source of money.
Yeah.
Parties used to set the primary calendar and kind of rule with an iron fist. And
now the states
they've just been trampled by state governments, and it looks like there's going to be something like a national, California going February 5th or whatever it is. So they sort of lost that, and then I don't quite know what Democrats stand for anymore. It's not as sort of rigid as it once was, and Republicans, God only knows. Obviously you don't have to be a fiscal conservative anymore. You don't have to be pro-life. If you look at Giuliani, you don't have to be pro-gun. It's sort of wide open. So do parties matter anymore?
I think we're moving to a point where their core functions have either been outsourced or can be built by candidates on their own.
And what about,
you don't need the party's fundraising list anymore.
The other big thing, of course, is that if you want to get on all 50 ballots, traditionally the only realistic way to do that has been through the two parties. But you've got, Unity 08 has sprouted up as this kind of third party internet movement that remains to be seen if they can attract an impressive candidate. But they've already signed up with Steptoe and Johnson, and they've gotten rulings from the FEC, and it looks pretty clear that they're going to get on all 50 ballots. Like I said, whether or not there's a candidate who's really going to take advantage of that remains to be seen. But they seem to have sort of demolished another pillar of what it is that the parties could do, or that only the parties could do, which is get you on the ballot. And if that falls by the wayside too, you wonder after a while how important party really is.
Yeah, that's right. Anderson in 1980, he spent all his time and money just doing ballot access because the two parties made it so hard.
And even McCain in 2000, remember, there was this sort of fight to see if he could get on the New York ballot or not.
Right. It's still an issue even in the primaries. That's right. That's right. Yeah. What it's going to take is some. I'm not as optimistic as about the Unity 08 guy. I think they're nice guys and all, but I don't quite see. The way that they're doing the process seems to be turned upside down, as far as I can tell. I think you got to start.
Do you mean the process of getting a candidate elected president, or the process of simply getting ballot access?
Well, I think you got to start. You got to start with the big charismatic figure, and then all the rest will follow. They seem to want to start with building the organization and then turning it all over to some.
Yeah, that is what they want to do.
But I don't think any candidate. The candidates are too controlling. I don't think they're going to want to come in after this whole process has been set up and sort of be put in charge of it. I think what's going to happen is a candidate's going to come out of nowhere, and then the organization and the money and the people will follow. And there's definitely there's room for that candidate in the general election if the two front runners or if McCain and Hillary are the nominees, and they come out damaged, I think there'll be room for someone like that. Even Gore, who could, he doesn't have to run as a Democrat. Boy, I want to go back. There's one thing on my mind I want to go back to, and that is George Allen.
Yeah, well, we're going to talk about sort of Republicans on the mat who might be trying to lift themselves off, huh? And what about the news? I mean, I think of you as the sort of chief George Allen expert, a guy who covered his campaign all the way into the ground. And we get this news the other week. What, he's thinking about running for governor, maybe thinking about running for senator.
I mean, it's tragic.
I thought this guy was dead. He's like Jason, kind of getting up from the,
Yeah, no, it is tragic. I mean, honestly, I think if he had beaten Webb in Virginia by even a half a point, I think a lot of people before that would have said, "Oh, he's damaged goods."
And we're talking about like 5,000 votes. I mean, a swing of 5,000 votes would have achieved that, right?
I think at the swing of 5,000 votes, the guy would have been he could be right now one of the leading presidential nominees on the Republican side. I mean, they're that desperate on the Republican side. They're that upset with the choices of McCain, Romney, and Giuliani.
After
I didn't believe that.
I'm not Jewish. How dare you? I mean, the guy offended sort of every racial and religious and ethnic group on the face of the earth. Besides,
I actually think he'd be a competitive presidential candidate if he had just.
In fact, he brought shame to rednecks. But anyway,
5,000 votes, and I think he would be a competitive presidential candidate despite it all, because he could point. He could look at. He's like, I was tested. They got all this garbage out about me and my background. I've been vetted, and I still won.
But his whole background was garbage. How is that?
I'm just saying
to be a serious presidential candidate.
I'm just saying what the political argument would have been.
Conservative garbage is basically what the case would be.
Exactly. To conservatives, it would have been fine. It would have been like the liberal media tried to destroy me, and I won. And that's the kind of tough candidate you want. I'm not saying it's an intellectually honest argument. I'm just saying what it would be.
Right.
And the other thing is, the big issue in his election was race and the Confederate flag. And I hate to say this, but in South Carolina, that would not have been a problem for George Allen. He would have had a complicated position on the flag.
Would have had to beat on that right off the bat.
Exactly.
He's been on both sides of the issue.
Exactly. He would have said, "Look, the liberal media tried to defeat me, and I still won." And he would have just dismissed all of the stuff that was true, as just political garbage that was thrown out by his opponents.
Well, look, hypothetically, let's say he does do a comeback. What does the quote unquote liberal media think about it? I mean, look, there are still George Allen scandals or talk about them, out there and buzzing around. I mean, there were questions about his divorce record, about his applying to the bar that were never answered.
That's true.
There are other things going around that may make a return to politics difficult. I mean, is this the sort of thing you think is realistic?
That's true. I think perhaps his chances would have been better in the Republican primaries had he won by half a point, rather than trying to rehabilitate his career in Virginia now.
And go back to ground zero and run in a state where people voted you out of office and are familiar with every last screw up and racial utterance that passed your lips.
Yeah. I think he's. I don't want to say he's finished in Virginia politics, but I'd be shocked if that guy could win again. Because, look, it's all about Northern Virginia. The voters there are different. I mean, what happened in Virginia is that the electorate basically shifted underneath Allen over the years. He came to Virginia and decided he had to be this redneck, conservative politician, and slowly the electorate changed, and he tried to.
Boots, racism, yeah.
Exactly. I mean, he tried to, but he was playing catch up, and it was way too late.
So let me ask you this: I mean, if he does run again in Virginia, doesn't scandal? I mean, isn't he more susceptible to scandal than the typical candidate would be, given his background as somebody who was embroiled and enmeshed in this sort of thing?
He might.
I mean, it's almost like a genetic predisposition to alcoholism, right? Once you've been beaten and lost because of scandal, if you try and kind of come back in. Isn't that the big question about you that's going to define how people think about you and how they write about your campaign?
I think you're right. I mean, the race stuff is in Virginia that does sort of define him, especially with the political press. Mm-hmm. All right, let's move on to one other issue here. While we're talking about
adultery, since we're talking about scandals. What about here's Newt Gingrich is another guy who seemed to be enjoying a boomlet, and then all of a sudden he confesses to James Dobson that he was.
Now, do you think this was Newt getting something out of the way because he's seriously considering running for president?
I have no goddamn.
Was this calculated?
I thought it was about this. If he thought he was helping himself out there, I mean, look, I've always thought all along that the idea that he would run and be taken seriously by serious people as someone who could win the presidency of the United States was like batshit insane.
Well,
I don't. So
it shows you. Yeah, it shows you that,
to me, it's still a sideshow and it's sort of an entertaining one. But I can't see how this helped his candidacy at all.
You know what it does show you? It shows you that the worst thing to do this cycle. Not only should you not have experience if you want to run for president this cycle, but you shouldn't run.
Yeah, exactly.
You stay on the sidelines, you go to the Academy Awards, you talk to James Dobson, you do anything but get in the race. You just wait and wait and wait and wait for people to get sick of the front runners, and then you get in
Well,
late.
everybody else kind of drops dead, and you're the last guy standing, and you just,
And usually that strategy, that strategy has never worked in the past. That was the Wesley Clark strategy, but, it does seem like a viable option this time, especially, I was going to say especially on the Republican side, but really on both sides. I mean, the case for Gore getting in September when people are sick of Hillary and sick of Obama and sick of Edwards is still compelling, and the case for someone like Gingrich doing the same on the Republican side is really compelling, especially if you're Gingrich and you know that people are going to get really sick of you the day you get in the race. In other words, the day you get in will be your best day, and it'll all be downhill from there.
Yeah.
You really just want to stay out of you want to stay out of you want to avoid scrutiny as long as you possibly can.
So let's cast reality aside for a moment. So if Newt does do this and gets in the race, how big a deal is the fact that he was having an affair during the Monica Lewinsky scandal?
Well,
how does that hurt him among evangelicals, among social conservatives in the Republican primary, or are those guys just so out to lunch, given their support of Romney and their hatred of McCain that they don't know which way is up?
Well, I think that the key is, compared to whom? Compared to Giuliani's views on social issues and his marital history, Gingrich is looking pretty good. Compare, McCain's divorced. I mean, basically, if you're a Republican voter and marital fidelity is your most important issue, I mean, you're either
moving to Canada.
Well, you're either voting for a Mormon, and a lot of conservative Republicans seem to have a problem with that, or you're voting for a Democrat, right? Obama, Edwards, and Hillary. Hillary especially is fidelity is her middle name.
What's that coming for? One of the Clintons does. I said one of the Clintons does.
Absolutely. So you're basically looking at voting for a Democrat if that's your big issue. So I guess that's why it doesn't mean much. It's not going to be a problem for Gingrich because his opponents stack up so poorly in comparison.
Let's talk about just for fun and another Republican who's sort of fallen on hard times. I was fascinated to read in the New York Times that McCain is back on the Straight Talk Express. What do you think of that?
This came out in a lot of the coverage, so I'm sure there's lots of snickering among the reporters who are on this thing.
I'm trying not to snicker myself here.
But there is something sad and poignant, and I don't want to say pathetic, but pathetic about what's happened to McCain.
Also, I had an epiphany in the shower this morning. Speaking of pathetic, you know who John McCain is?
Who?
It finally occurred to me. Getting back on the Straight Talk Express, trying to relive. Did you ever see Napoleon Dynamite?
Yeah.
John McCain is Uncle Rico from Napoleon Dynamite, the kind of loser guy who lives in a bus and drives around and is constantly trying to relive his senior year in high school.
Goes back to high school, yeah.
When he almost led the football team to the state championship, and he talks about, oh man, if I could just build a time machine, and maybe send me back there. Isn't John McCain essentially trying to build a time machine by hopping aboard the Straightboard Express and make a case to me that he is less pathetic than Uncle Rico? Because I don't see it.
Yeah, and look, politically there was a point to the Straight Talk Express. You had to sort of invite the media in. You had to do something opposite of what George Bush is doing. But this time, be who you are. You're trying to be the establishment candidate.
And what did he do to Adam yesterday? He invited him on the Straight Talk Express and then said that gays in the military and that the AG scandal were both out of balance to talk about. So the Straight Talk Express has already, got two flat tires.
Right, and that's the problem he's going to have. The other thing is, the Straight Talk Express apparently was driving in circles around Des Moines yesterday, so they could have the media come in and do all these interviews. So the Straight Talk Express, I mean, talk about metaphors for someone's campaign.
Exactly. Which reporter is going to be the first one to put that in their lead?
It was in Nagurny's piece this morning. That's how I knew about it.
Oh, all right.
So I mean, there is something just sort of it's like this trying to capture lightning in a bottle twice, and it's just if you're going to be the establishment candidate, if you're going to be the guy who's trying to be the heir to Bush, just do it and stop trying trying to
But it's sort of sad too, in a very kind of poignant, particular sort of way. I mean, it's like to draw on another movie now. It's like Wooderson and Dazed and Confused, where you keep kind of trying to go back to when you were cool. And
we're getting a real taste of your aesthetic.
The more time,
kind of
you
movies
can
you
see
like
what
here.
I've been doing, and I haven't been reading any of the candidate biographies. I got a baby. I just sit around in front of the TV watching movies all the time now. But doesn't this sort of? I wonder if this doesn't kind of backfire and hurt McCain in the sense that it contrasts the kind of desperate candidate he is now with the kind of popular, free-spoken maverick he was then. I mean, is this really such a smart political strategy?
Well, exactly. It gave, I mean, quite frankly, it gave everyone the opportunity to make the case we're making right now, is to point out the obvious contradictions here, to point out the fact that his campaign, now it hasn't quite imploded, but there's a certain cratering quality to what's gone on in the last few months. I mean, he tried this one strategy. He tried to do the Hillary Clinton thing, the George Bush thing, just be the establishment candidate who sucks up all the money in organization. And for whatever reason, it hasn't worked. And so he's sort of realized that was an uncomfortable role, and he's thinking, you know what, I got to go back to that 2000 McCain Maverick thing, that people seem to like. And he seems suddenly like a guy who doesn't quite. I don't want to goes too far to say he doesn't know who he is.
But it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense
within
within the context of the Republican primary either, does it? I mean, he's trying to get Republican. He's trying to sort of walk a very fine line here, right? He wants to maintain his popularity with independents and Democrats and
well, it's not like independents don't matter, though.
But at the same time, he's got to appeal to these social conservatives or whoever, the wingers in the Republican primary. By getting back aboard the Straight Talk Express, don't you remind those very wingers that you need to win over about what a pain in their ass you were for most of your career?
Yeah, I think there's a little bit of that. You remind people, this was the media darling. We never liked him because the liberal press liked him. So yeah, there's a little bit of that. But I think I agree with you to the extent that it points up the fact that McCain is going through a bit of an identity crisis right now. That the McCain of 2000 isn't the McCain of 2008, and that he's constantly shifting back and forth between the Bush strategy and the old McCain strategy, and it's leaving him in a place that he's not where he isn't usually, which is doesn't quite know who he is.
I think you're absolutely right, and I think that the identity crisis theme as a whole sort of captures exactly what's going on in the Republican primary, and maybe what they need to do is kind of appoint a therapist in chief instead of running for commander in chief. But on that note, why don't we? I don't know about you. I'm getting a little tired of all this. Why don't you want to wrap this up and
let's wrap it up. This was,
save the rest of the good stuff for next time?
Absolutely, it was a pleasure.
All right. Well, I guess we'll throw up the links to all the pieces, and if people want to know more, they can read and comment, and maybe we'll be back to talk about it later.
And congratulations on the Atlantic's nominations for National Magazine Awards this week.
Thank you very much. 3 of them. Nothing I did, but it's good for the magazine.
I'll see you soon. Take care.
Take it easy.